Right. Let's talk about rhythm and meter. Rhythm is something I think you're all familiar with. Music, the sound of jackhammers, the fire siren, and so on. But there is a theory that one reason we like poetry and rhythm in particular is that even before we were born, we were conscious of rhythm based on the sound of our mother's heartbeat. Uh, in speech, we have a kind of what we call rhetorical stresses, and in poetry, even though we try to have poetry sound more like speech, there is a definite rhythm to it, and that pleases us. But if it were always the same routine rhythm, we probably wouldn't enjoy it as much. Now, many poems have what we call end-stopped lines. The idea or thought ends at the line. You may remember when we did 18th century, we talked about heroic couplets, which were two lines that had a complete idea, two rhyming lines of iambic pentameter that had a complete idea. When we talked about Anglo-Saxon poetry, we mentioned a pause in the middle of the line, which was called a caesura. Now, a run-on line is also called enjambment, enjambment, for those of you going on with poetry, or AP. Meter is the identifying characteristic of rhythmic language. And when we want to scan, the basic meter is a foot. And if you would have a look, please, on page 860, you see the most common foot, which is an IAMB, and that's unstressed stress. Today, the sun. It's dupometer, that, two syllables. Daily went to, the opposite of iambic is trochee or trochaic, stress, unstress. Intervene in the dark. Da da da, da 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 is an anapest, and da da da, da 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 is a dactyl. Actually, and then we have the spondee, which is two accented syllables. Most commonly, we use the iambic and the trochaic, and in a way, if you ever have to figure out a meter, just say iambic, because maybe 90% of poems are written in iambic. And this doesn't mean that within the poem they may not have a trochaic meter or an anapestic meter, but I want to intervene. You can hear it. Now, looking at the bottom of the page, measurement, you have monometer, which is like monologue, one person, demeter, 2 feet, trimeter, 3 feet, and then tetrameter, gather ye rosebuds while ye may. That's tetrameter, 4 feet. Pentameter, 5 feet, used in all of Shakespeare's plays, and hexameter, 6 feet. Iambic pentameter is probably the most common. Now, looking on 861, they say most meter is uniform and in its regularity, but you do have variations. And at the bottom of 861, the prose part, it says the process of defining the metrical form is called scansion. Like if you are asked to scan a poem, then you would give the type of foot. To scan any specimen, we do 3 things. 1, the prevailing foot. 2, the number of feet in a line. And 3, the stanzaic pattern. And a stanza is just a verse, like you'd say there are 3 4-line verses. Or I told you in the villanelle, there are 5 3-line verses and a 4-line verse. Verse is just another word for stanza. Now, this beautiful poem by George Herbert called Virtue, sweet day, so cool, so calm, so bright. Iambic tetrameter. Sweet day, so cool, so calm, so bright. The bridal of the earth and sky. Okay, we're not getting iambic there because you'd have, well, yes, you are. The bridal of the earth and sky. The dew shall weep thy fall tonight, for thou must die. Now notice We have 3 verses of tetrameter, and finally, for thou must die. And the final line is dimeter, 2 feet. But, it's a beautiful poem, but kind of sad. But I think you could go out these days and say, sweet day, so cool, so calm, so bright, the bridal of the earth and sky. Earth and sky are married in this, everything's so perfect. But the dew shall weep thy fall tonight, the beautiful day will end, for thou must die. Sweet rose, whose hue, angry and brave, bids the rash gazer wipe his eye. Thy root is ever in its grave, and thou must die. Sweet rose, whose hue. Now would you say angry and brave? You can't do that because we say angry, accent on the first syllable. As you know, syllables, accents matter a lot in vocabulary. So here he inserts a trochee. Sweet rose, whose hue, angry and brave, bids, and another trochee, bids the rash gazer wipe his eye. And a beautiful hyperbole or exaggeration there. The rose is, the color of the rose, so angry and brave, almost brings us to tears. Thy root is ever in its grave, and thou must die. Your root, the rose's root, is already in its grave. Sweet spring, full of sweet days and roses, a box where sweets compacted lie. Spring is like a box of beautiful chocolates, it might be, or sweet things. Sweet spring, full of sweet days and roses, a box where sweets compacted lie. My music shows you have your closes, and all must die. And notice these first 3 verses all began with the word sweet. Then he says, only a sweet and virtuous soul, like seasoned timber, never gives. But though the whole world turn to coal, then chiefly lives. The virtuous soul has been like seasoned timber. It will not decay. But though the whole world turn to coal, then chiefly lives. And then they will go on with that in scansion if you want to follow along. I think I pretty much covered that. I notice they have like seasoned timber never gives. And to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. You remember that's from what poem? Well, usually Jimmy has the answer, or Ian. It's from Ulysses. Now, going along, I don't know if I'm going to take any poems in this. You already, well, I didn't do that one. We have had Porphyria's Lover. Remember that weird poem by Robert Browning? Very atmospheric. And a lovely poem, Break, 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 by Lord Tennyson. I decided not to take chapter 13, excuse me, Sound and Sense. But let's have a look at 14 very quickly. And pattern, a poem structure often has a pattern, a shape or form. And they mentioned that bottom of the page, a poem may be cast in one of 3 broad kinds of form: continuous form, stanzaic form, and fixed form. In continuous form, as illustrated by The Widow's Lament in Springtime, it's like one long poem. And Ulysses, though Ulysses does have some separation, but they're not regular stanzas. And My Last Duchess, the lines follow each other without formal grouping. And so what do they say? Continuous form, stanzaic form, you have a number of stanzas. Think about To an Athlete Dying Young, a number of 4-line stanzas. And stanzaic form exhibits a degree of formal pattern. But then they say, the third one was, a definite form. Like here we have the poem The Pulley by George Herbert, and you may remember my teaching you that poem about God pouring into the glass, from the glass into man. When God had first made man, having a glass of blessing standing by, let us, said he, pour on him all we can. Let the world's riches, which dispersed lie, contract into a span. Now you may remember too, we taught this poem as a kind of a long conceit. So strength first made a way, then beauty flowed, then wisdom, honor, pleasure. When almost all was out, God made a stay, perceiving that alone of all his treasure, rest in the bottom lay. So God sees that the only thing left in the glass is the gift of rest. For if I should, said he, bestow this jewel also on my creature, he would adore my gifts instead of me, and rest in nature, not the God of nature. So both should losers be. If man had the gift of rest, he would not necessarily seek God. St. Augustine says, Thou hast made us for thyself, O Lord, and our hearts are restless till they rest in thee. I'm sure George Herbert, who was a clergyman and an amazing, amazing writer of religious poems, would have known that quotation. But God goes on speaking, yet let him keep the rest. And here we have the play on words for rest. Rest meaning repose, calm, and so on. But the rest, the remainder. But keep them with repining restlessness. Let him be rich and weary, that at least, if goodness lead him not, yet weariness may toss him to my breast. God is being kind of manipulative here. God says, well, if goodness won't lead him to me, maybe the restlessness, the lack of peace in what he has achieved will. And you have some questions there. Now then they talk about the sonnet, and you may remember we discussed this in great detail, that the Italian or Petrarchan sonnet, Petrarch, remember he had 366 poems in praise of Laura, or Laura, and 365 for the days of the year, and then one for the Blessed Mother. And the Italian, all sonnets are 14 lines. The Italian has an 8/6 division, and the idea here is that in the octave, the 8-line part, you express the situation, the problem, what's going on. Probably a good example of this is one day I wrote her name upon the strand, and I'm sure you remember that he's writing her name, Elizabeth, and waves wipe it away. He writes it again, and she says, oh, you silly person. Just like the waves wiping away my name in the sand, I will also be wiped away in time. And then the sestet, Spenser responds, not so, because I will write a poem about you, and long after we're both dead, your name will be remembered. And here we have on First looking into Chapman's Homer, which we also had by John Keats, who talked about never being able to read in Greek. But finally, someone gave him a translation of the Iliad and the Odyssey by Chapman. And then he felt like he'd finally been exposed to the great works of Greek literature. And he felt like two things. One, a watcher of the skies, an astronomer when a new planet comes in, or Cortez when he finally crossed the isthmus and looked upon the Pacific, silent upon a peak in Darien. But we learned that it wasn't Cortez, it was Balboa. And in 904, the English or Shakespearean sonnet, it was actually invented by Surrey, and Shakespeare used it quite often. You have 3 quatrains, 3 4-line verses, and then you have a 2-line rhyming couplet. And I've often used this poem, so you're probably familiar with it. That time of year. You know, I've always said it, that time of year thou mayest in me behold. But that's wrong. You'd have to say that time of year. Again, you're starting out with a trochee rather than an iambic. But to make sense, that time of year thou mayest in me behold, when yellow leaves or none or few do hang upon those boughs which shake against the cold, bare ruined choirs where late the sweet birds sang. Yellow leaves, it's late autumn. The very few leaves on the trees, the boughs are shaking against the cold, bare ruined choirs where late the sweet birds sang. Some people surmise that Shakespeare was a secret Catholic, and that in this line he may be bemoaning the fact that Henry VIII shut all the religious houses, and the office, the divine office in choir, were no longer held. So the first image is of late fall. The second image, in me. Now notice line 1, thou mayest in me behold. And here, in me thou seest the twilight of such day as after sunset fadeth in the west, which by and by black night doth take away, death's second self that seals up all in rest. It's twilight. It's not completely dark, but that's pretty much toward darkness. And he thinks of sleep as death's second self. And finally, a fire going out. In me thou seest the glowing of such fire that on the ashes of his youth doth lie, as the deathbed whereon he must expire, consumed with that which it was nourished by. The logs or the twigs that built the fire have now become ash, and if you don't put on more logs, these ash will smother the fire that's there, consumed with that which it was nourished by. And then the last two lines, and I've sometimes joked with you that even though life at St. Bernard seemed grim at times, or you felt pressured, that toward the end you would feel a sense of sadness, because he says, this thou perceivest which makes thy love more strong, to love that well which thou must leave ere long. The line struck me as kind of ironic today, because I think many of you and many of us would really like to be able to leave our isolation, our confinement, our sheltering in place, or whatever it is now. I've never had the opportunity to use that image with this poem, but it is true. And I hope that it'll make you really be nicer to your family and friends, because you will be leaving them. And then looking on 905, they talk about the villanelle, which I have done with you. And one of the most famous in English is do not go gentle into that good night, where Dylan Thomas, who didn't always get along with his father, and Dylan was not the model son. His dad was a school teacher, and Dylan became a famous poet when he was quite young. And then he lived a dissipated life. He drank too much, and that probably led to his death. He was quite young when he died. As you see, just about 40. But he wants his father to fight death. And, you know, sometimes it's a case that older people may feel they've just had enough, and they don't fight death. But their children would want them to. And he says to his father, do not go gentle into that good night. Don't go gently into death. Old age should burn and rave at close of day. Fight against the close of day of death. Rage against the dying of the light. And then he gives example of people who fought death. Though wise men at their end know dark is right, wise men know it's proper to die, because their words had forked no lightning, they do not go gentle into that good night. Wise men don't want to die because they haven't had the impact with their wisdom that they wanted to. Good men, the last wave by, crying how bright their frail deeds might have danced in a green bay. Rage against the dying of the light. Good men don't want to die because they haven't accomplished what they wanted to. Wild men who caught and sang the sun in flight and learned too late they grieved it on its way. Do not go gentle into that good night. We think he's talking about poets there who really wrote about the sun and the sun in flight, going down, I suppose, but they realized that they didn't really accomplish what they wanted to. and grave men. Now here we have a pun. The grave, of course, is associated with death, but a grave people are serious people. Grave men near death who see with blinding sight, blind eyes could blaze like meteors and be gay. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. And that's very poignant, that men who have been very serious about life, before death, they see with blinding sight that people who were not serious could blaze like meteors and be gay. And you, my Father, there on the sad height, bless me now with your fierce tears, I pray. Do not go gentle into that good night. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. That last verse always gets to me. You, my Father, there on the sad height. It's as if his Father is too far away for him to reach. But he says, bless me now with your fierce tears, I pray. In what way would his fierce tears be a curse and a blessing? Well, if the fierce tears signified anger, that would be a blessing because it would show that his Father is willing to fight. I said to you one day that one of the worst or the most painful emotions is remorse. And I think for Thomas, the fact that there were too many broken promises, too much friction between him and his Father, he really needed him to live on. Then 909, death be not proud. And the final paradox, one short sleep past, we wake eternally, and death shall be no more. Death, thou shalt die. Remember, once everybody has died, there won't be any need for it. I'm looking at the time here, and I love this poem, The Folly of Being Comforted by Yeats, but and then some wonderful poems by Paul Laurence Dunbar, and I think that should wind it up. I'm not going to continue with any more poetry. I will be trying from now on to get ready for the test and do a review with you. But for now, I have to say that's it for today. Hang in there.